Okay, good afternoon. Wow, my goodness, people, please. How are you? I want to introduce our panel. We have three amazing individuals here. We have Tarek Hassan. He is the CMO of McDonald's USA, which is by far the biggest and most profitable division of McDonald's. We have Vikram Batra, the global CMO of HP Inc. And then we have Nikki Darden. He's the head of integration and engagement of Citi.
Got to break up the party, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, here we go. Excellent. So we're going to have a conversation about the evolving role of the marketing function and the CMO within corporations. Every year, this firm Spencer Stuart likes to do this survey that basically says that the CMO chair is under threat, and every year is the same kind of story. In my experience, the market is divided into two companies that do not thoroughly understand the role of marketing, and they rotate the chief marketing officer and the marketing department frequently, and those that do, thanks to the leading role of the CMO in earning a seat at the table. And those companies have a very important role for the CMO as a strategy partner of the CEO, a driver of culture, and more importantly, a driver of growth. The three people that I have the privilege of having with us today embody those qualities, and they've become essential individuals, pillars, if you will, of the C-suite. So let's start at the very beginning. How do you describe your job, Vic? Why don't we start with you?
Wow. How do I define my job? 50%, I'm a shrink. The other 50 leader. It's interesting. The role has changed a lot. And I think there's a lot of pendulum swings, especially in the last 4 or 5 years. What the role was in 2019, what COVID made the role, and now what the role's becoming. It's changed a lot. And so, I would say if you take out all the bullshit, primary role is drive growth for the business, like primary role. Your responsibility is to drive growth for the business, and so that's the biggest thing. The other thing when you get to the C-suite is, you realize that half of your role is putting on your company's hat, and the other half is putting on your function's hat. So that makes your role, that makes who you are and what you bring to the table. I can be in a conversation on supply chain, factory decisions across the world on one day, and you bring your perspective, but that's your role. So I think the role of the CMO has shifted a lot, but I would say that's kind of where you play, half and half.
Tarek?
I define it in four specific streams. The first one I think is the most important, which is people and culture. So I take the role of developing our people and ensuring that creating an environment where amazing people can do exceptional things. And in order for that to happen, you also have to cultivate the right culture internally inside the organization. The second one picks up on part of what Vic is saying. It's your leader at the table as part of the leadership. Yes, you happen to be a marketer, but as part of the leadership team to define the strategy and the success of the business. Third, then to convert that into how your function delivers against that, and putting accountability and measurement against your contribution to that. And then lastly, I would say is a foresight view. Where is the customer going? Where is the category going? Where are competitors going? And that's that sort of innovation space that you start to think about. And you permission to think where 10 years out, 5 years out, where the organization often doesn't have time. So I think those are the sort of 4 focus areas.
Nikki, how do you define it within the context of Citi in a company that is currently under government review?
You had to go there. I would say it's interesting. The role of marketing broadly and the CMO, which I am not, more specifically within the realm of being under a consent order, which we actually are moving away from talking about, not because we don't want to talk about it, but because we're at the point where our people get it. Regulators get it and understand that we take it seriously. And so now, and this is where I think marketing really steps in more sort of forward-leaning, it's about the future and how we're going to be transforming, how we are already in the process of transforming. So a lot of the focus for the CMO for us is really about that forward-looking, that innovation. What does the future of the organization look like, and how do we communicate that to our various stakeholders, whether they be ensuring that we are aligned from a senior leadership perspective, but also with our key stakeholders of regulators, our customers, our clients, and our colleagues, and how can they feel good about the direction that we are driving. Because if we're focusing on growth, which of course we are, even in this environment, then how do we ensure that our people feel like we've got the right strategy and a winning plan that we can run on? And I think that's a lot of the work that we're doing. One of the other things I'll just point out is, you know, we are one company, but 5 interconnected businesses in 160 countries with, you know, daily transaction volumes that exceed the GDP of Germany. And so a lot of the role, frankly, is herding cats and ensuring that all those things to the best of our ability, because it is a process, that we are showing up in the same way and aligned across all of that complexity.
Great. You have all touched upon the important angle of helping drive the business, on driving growth. And normally marketing departments that get in trouble are marketing departments that forget that they're not building brands for the sake of building brands. They're building brands for the sake of building sustainable business. And the whole question of how do we show the value of marketing comes around time and time again, not just on the tech side of the world, even in companies like PepsiCo 3 weeks ago, for example. How do you guys show marketing and the worth of marketing in the overall business agenda, Vic?
Oh, sure, I'll go. You know, it's interesting. I think marketing fell asleep for a while in the middle. You know, we stuck to old measures like MMM, or a lot of backward-looking things that you learned in college. Sorry, but you know, they're backward-looking models. I'll tell you 3 months later what that campaign did, and it was 10x ROI, and then you use that to say, if you cut my budget, your revenue is going to go down 10x because some model tells you that. And I think the rest of the company got sick and tired of that for a long time. And so I think that from a credibility perspective, look, you're never going to be able to figure out what exactly every dollar is doing. But if you can find ways to show short-term, mid-term, and long-term, build the right models, be smart about data, and be able to credibly show and make people understand. I think a lot of times marketers taught, especially if you go from CPG companies where inherently people understood those models. You go into tech, nobody understands those models. So you got to be able to help bring them along. And so it's really been a journey of building out different models for short term. And when I mean short term, I mean, how are you optimizing your marketing on an hourly basis and showing those results? You know, things like MTA, multi-touch attribution, connecting it back to retailers to show this person who bought this laptop, in my case, saw these ads that convinced them to do it. And then long term. So I think you've got to really break it down, bring people along.
You've done a lot of work on that area, Tarek. Can you share some of the journey?
Yeah, and I think the journeys look different depending on the categories I've worked in, because the enablement of what Vic's talking about comes back to you actually have access to the first party data, right? And the CPG categories, obviously, a lifetime ago, if they had understood where the world would end up from a technology perspective, probably would not have aligned with some of the retail deals that they did because they gave away the aspect of that data. So living in the CPG world, I think I learned things that were valuable about going deep on the customer in an intimate way and reflecting and depending on my channels to tell me how the sales results were. I think moving into the banking world, that was the first chapter of big data, a lot of the things that Vic's talking about. And now in the McDonald's space and in the retail space, being at Petco, having access to that data is great. But what I would tell you is you can measure all day long, but if you don't have a culture that's willing to understand the priority, it goes back to what you were talking about, do you understand the role of marketing, understand the priority of the customer? Someone can always find another data point to challenge your data point, right? Because they're not perfect models by any stretch. And I think I've been fortunate in the last two roles that I've been in, we understand the role of what the value of marketing is. And frankly, at McDonald's, we essentially are a real estate company, a supply company, an operations company, and a marketing company. And so it's been a pleasure to be in an environment where the CEO actually talks to the street about the role of marketing and driving the business. Having said that, we actually have to do it. And so the team has done a tremendous amount of work in a very short time. We've launched our loyalty program not quite 2 years ago. And we moved from a company that had pretty basal transactional data, not even with great longitudinal value to it. In fact, my leader, Caleb's in the audience, who runs all this on a day-to-day basis, to a company that now has just north of almost 40 million knowns on a platform in a category that never thought about a one-to-one relationship at the drive-through, if you will. And so that's great, and we're able to convince the organization internally, but he has to also deal with how do we convince 1,500 franchisees who run restaurants on a P&L model that is based on daily sales, daily costs, daily margin, and we're trying to convert them to understand in a digital world what that roadmap looks like in the future. And that is not an easy journey. I give these guys a ton of credit for getting up and slogging through that on a daily basis, because that is the unlock. So we're kind of an interesting organization. We can win internally all day long, but if I don't win over the keys of 15,000 stores and at a local level, then we can't. And they're literally two different conversations that we have to try and develop there. And it's water on a rock. You got to keep doing it.
Nikki, how do we do it at Citi?
I think, one of the things, there's so much similarity, of course, but I think at the end of the day for us, we are a relationship business, right? Especially as we move more and more to being institutionally focused, B2B, and also, of course, wealth, right? As we shift that, then it's really about how do we differentiate ourselves and what we offer. At the end of the day, products matter, rates matter, all of those things matter, but it's those relationships that are the differentiator. And we're here with this group of people. How can marketing be the thought leader in the C-suite, at the table, helping people to understand the insights of why our customers are behaving a certain way, especially on the B2B side, where we tend to think about our customers as not necessarily being people, but as being companies. And we are there to really help put front and center that the CFO, as an example, also has a family and has values and have things that are important to them in how they're doing business and who they choose to do that business with. So how do we put those insights, learnings, and strategy front and center for all of us to run on, not just from a marketing perspective? Because at the end of the day, what we are learning is, in some places we win because we're there and our competitors are not, or we've got certain products, that are available that our competitors don't have. That's not how we want to win, though. Like, we want that, but also how are we differentiating beyond our technical capabilities or whatever else it may be. And I think having someone who's focused on the why of our customers and clients is critically important to rounding out the view and the vision and the strategies and decisions that are being made at the C-level.
You know, Antonio, just real quick, because Nikki just touched on something that I think is important. The relationship to prove these out that you're asking about, the CFO. And I think that's also been the fatal error of a lot of marketers who have believed in the past that relationship is a contentious one. Mm-hmm. I need to prove this from a cost perspective, as opposed to today, I think the more successful ones are a collaborative relationship where we're actually developing those solutions together. So Caleb's team can't be successful in proving that out if what we need to do is actually change the reinvention of the P&L. So working really closely there. Same thing with technology. You think about the way marketers. So how are you even thinking about your C-suite relationships, I think is another critical element.
I know all of you, and I know that there was a before and after. And all of you now are talking very fluently about the importance of the utilization of data, of showing worth, and all that, which is very important. But sometimes we take for granted the role that marketing has to play in building that mindset and that infrastructure. And I know for a fact that each one of you have done it within your companies. Let's start with you, Tarek. Can you share some of the war stories on this one?
You know, it's funny. I think ironically, having started it as a planner, as a strategist, has actually developed me as a different kind of leader to do this transformation, because the customer has always been front and center. I think starting in the agency world, relationships have always been front and center. So I think I inherently understood the need for that. But I also think the mistake that marketers sometimes make is the need to have ownership as opposed to giving the win or the belief to others in the organization, right? And that's the enablement component of it. Sometimes the most powerful impact of marketing inside an organization is the invisible hand effect. And do you have the confidence to recognize? You don't need for that to always be recognized by the organization. But I think getting to a simple story, really understanding what that is, and having an organization focused on it. And for us, in my latest chapter, and I would say it was true also the turnaround for Petco, was sometimes it's just about creating a context for the business that everybody can see themselves in. And I think to your point, sometimes we as marketers spent so much time building brands on the view of what the customer could see that the organization couldn't see themselves in it. And that inherently is a flawed model that will fail. And so I would tell you, we spend as much time on our vision work that we've set for McDonald's internally far long before we started to think what that would look like externally. I just think marketers have to recognize you're marketing your internal organization, frankly, sometimes even more than you are the external to be successful.
Nikki, in Citi, the transformation to a more data-centric approach.
Yeah, well, you know, I would say the transformation focuses on what kind of data are we looking at, right? We've always been data-centric, but what kind of data are we looking at, and how are we pulling that through what we do? It's interesting. And I think many of us are guilty of this, have historically sort of measured ourselves against some pretty lofty KPIs. Yeah. Those that don't fly no more. Like, you know, yes, it's important to understand awareness and perception, and we still do that. And that is, at the end of the day, what I am responsible for is reputation, right? So that's still sort of it. But if that is not in service of driving business goals, then and your data and measurement and everything is mapping back to that, and also being developed forward-looking in service of that, then the rest of it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's not materializing in the bottom line. And I think part of how we do that as marketers is really just understanding the business. Like I mentioned, we've got a very vast and complex business. I am really sort of on a campaign within my own organization of people really understanding how we make money. People there are a lot of people who don't understand how we make money. And, I get it. If nothing wrong with people with agency backgrounds. I've been in banking my entire career. So, I get it. I've come from the product side and all of that. But there are people who sort of come in and they're great from a technical perspective within sort of the marketing function. But if you don't understand how we do business and how we drive it forward, and even mapping back to our mission of creating economic growth and progress, how what we do on a day-to-day basis achieves that, then what are we doing and how are we being a value to the organization? And so that's sort of my new campaign of just very basically, if you don't know how this works, you can't be successful.
Totally agree. We've called it in the past being a business person first and a marketing artisan second, and also the ability, what Tarek mentioned, of being bilingual and bicultural, meaning being able to sit with a CFO or a CEO with the same fluency of language on the business metrics as they are, and then being able to turn around and inspire the marketing ecosystem to deliver the right level of design and
That's right.
innovation and inspiration that we all want. Vic, you've done a lot of work on transformation at HP. Can you share a little bit of that, of the buckets that you dealt with?
So I'm not going to talk about cost cutting, but let me start with data first, because you said data and you said, hey, what are some of the battles with data? Look, first of all, how many students in here? Okay. We may have titles, but please don't think our lives are perfect at work, okay? This is not like we're sitting on glossy, absolutely perfect structures and everyone, okay, there's a lot of battles. In my case, what we went through over the years was, so you've got registration data when someone buys a product. You've got continuous, when it comes to technology and devices, you've got continuous data coming from those devices. You've got sales data coming from your direct online channel. You've got retailer data from the Best Buys and the Staples and the Walmarts of the world. And none of those teams talk to each other internally in the same company, okay? So those were realities you have to deal with. And how do you bring all that together into a data lake? Because for years, and I'm sure it was the same in other companies, when people had data, it was like, this is my data. But unless you actually put it all together, you won't get the insights. You won't be able to have data science teams actually start to figure out what to do, what not to do. And then you have the media agencies who are like holding, first-party data. So first, you got to get rid of those. We buy 90% of our media now in-house, not with agencies, because if you don't do that, I'm not in a place where, hey, I want to make this change to a marketing program, and the agency goes, oh yeah, we'll get back to you in 7 days. You're like, no, I want to do it now. So it's a lot of data battles, but once you sort of brought everyone together, once people start to see, if I have registration data and I can send that over to Google, I get a lot more insights on what's going on. So there was a lot of battles. Transformation, boy, I'll be quick. So we've done a lot of transformations. One was taking all of our digital media, all of our search in-house. We don't use agencies anymore, except for traditional media buys in countries like where we buy a lot of traditional media, like India, Brazil. That's where we use media. But 90% of my spend at HP, our spend at HP right now is in-house. 100% of search spend is in-house. We set up 2 studios, so content studios, one in India, new one in Argentina, you don't know about that one, in Buenos Aires, where we do most of our omni-channel content. So what we call lower funnel, product shots, videos, stuff that goes on websites, stuff that goes on Amazon.com, all in-house. We got rid of agencies that did that for us. So that's not only a huge cost saving, it's also a huge increase in efficiency because you're driving that stuff overnight. And that was a big transformation. The other transformation was really growth. So putting together growth marketing teams, and what does growth mean? It's kind of the new word for performance in a way, but it's putting together growth marketing teams that could actually start to create algorithms on each and every one of our product lines. And by the way, the algorithm changes from country to country. And then the biggest transformation sitting on all top of that is actually establishing a marketing university called Marketing Labs over the last 3 years, which teaches 1,200 of our marketing employees across the world everything from growth marketing to decision-making models, which quite honestly, I think a lot of marketing universities and schools have not caught up with. So we've had to completely redo the syllabus, literally. So if you do growth marketing, you've got a good 35, 40-day curriculum that over 6 months you've got to accomplish. So putting together that, because you got to train the people to do that. So a few different transformations in the last few years, but you set the foundation for a lot of it before you left. So
now, but you've taken to a completely different
Can we stay
level.
on the data for a
Go
second?
for it.
So you just heard Vic talk about all the different channels of that data collection. And frankly, not that it's easy, but the process of bringing it to a lake, you can get done. Here's the challenge that comes with that. Because we now have more data signals than ever, the understanding of why you're even using the data or the purpose of this is where the purpose of the organization becomes really critical. And this is why my team's tired of me wagging on about this. I don't believe in performance marketing versus brand marketing. I believe in brand performance, because I think understanding the role of the purpose of what you're trying to do and understanding your customers come into play to avoid creating an organization that's around the data made me do it. And ironically, where I really learned this was Vic and I worked previously at HP. We worked for a CEO who was an engineer who, one of my things I took away in my career, he had this ability to look at data that when you were done looking at the data, you would say, black and white, I know what to do. And yet he would pull out social anthropological views, case studies from other examples. I mean, you just draw on things away from the data that I now kind of refer to as understanding the intimacy of the data that would actually have you challenge that black and white. And I think that's the other thing we come into today is the danger of thinking now that we've got the data organized that automatically gives you all the answers. And this is why I'm not concerned about the machine being the thing that runs it completely. You still need to have an understanding of the human relationship and what the notion of that value is and how it relates to the value of the brand and the relationship to the brand. And so I think that's the other messy part that Vic's hitting at is even once you get your house in order on that data, that does not create an assumption that just hit start and go and everything will be fine. And I think there's a number of direct-to-consumer companies you can see that have failed. Started out huge, massive acquisition, and then when someone else came into the category and was able to sort of have a commodity option, they didn't have a brand in place, they didn't have a relationship with the customer in place, and they falter. And I think you've seen that model take place.
Well, we had last night, in fact, one of your representatives, we had a discussion, 5 companies that were represented, all different industries, and everybody was saying, oh, we've got data. We've got lots of data. In fact, we have way too much data.
More than we need.
How do we actually integrate it so that it can become the vehicle by which you build more meaningful types of relationships, which I think is going to be the challenge of this data-rich era, and I'm not quite sure whether generative AI is going to fix that problem at all. Let me switch topics a little bit. We've all talked about 3 words that sometimes trigger people the wrong way: politics, power, and networks. And in some of the conversations that I have with the people that participate in my program, we reframe the words as politics is value neutral. Politics is the way that an organization gets things done within its culture. Power is the impact and influence that you have in an organization and your ability to be recognized for it. And then network is the critical relationships that you need to build based on mutuality to get things done. So great, successful senior marketers like the 3 of you understand politics, own their power, and have built very meaningful networks. How do you guys do it personally? Let's start with you.
It's interesting for financial services. We are a tiny industry, as big and vast as we are. It's particularly when you're talking about New York, we're very incestual, even today. Hey y'all, like my people are here. That and because of that, I think one of the things that just sort of the natural organic part, and then I'll talk a little bit about where one needs to be more intentional. But the natural organic part is maintaining the relationships that you develop just through the normal day-to-day, and not thinking of people just as your work friends or whatever it may be, because we are all moving around in a fairly small pot. And so understanding who you can pull on, who you can rely on. And for me personally, where I've built up credibility, sometimes in a different organization, that now I find myself working with people who may have more power than I have in a new organization, but they know me and they know what I can do, and that they can depend on me, and what I said earlier, that I understand the business, because sometimes that becomes a bit of a frustration, and I become their ally and they become mine. And so those very simple things of just being mindful and thoughtful about sort of managing those relationships organically, I think is critically important and shouldn't be forgotten. But more intentional is then what do you do with those? I believe that is the way to build relationships, because I believe in centering on the authenticity of relationships. But what do you do with them? How do you mine them? How do you stay connected? How do you offer your own power, credibility, reputation to someone else for a future favor? That's where the politics often come in. How do you navigate through an organization and understand where you need to have the meeting before the meeting, and establish who's going to speak up and support when you get to the meeting, so that you're not walking in blind, you're not walking in as an individual, but instead as a coalition. And I just think thinking through where you can not just draw on other people, but where you can also help fuel other people is just critically important. At least it has been for me, in being able to, I think I've applied in my entire career, which is long, maybe 5 jobs, internally and externally. I think I've been doing this for 29 years at this point. I've probably applied for 5 jobs. I think that's pretty good. I've probably had 20 jobs, frankly. And it's because then people, as I said, know what you can do and start putting you in the room, start mentioning your name when you are not at the table. That creates a space for you to be at that table sort of the next go round. So, just I get so much of what I get done through relationships. And knowing who to call. And when I don't know who to call, knowing who to ask. How do I navigate this situation? Because this is new to me, Anyway, I can go on.
The network is the work.
The network is the work.
It's politics, power, network. For me, I think it all kind of starts at network. And maybe even before that. I have a very simple belief that successful companies don't make happy employees. Happy employees make successful companies. It's the other way around. And so the person is more important than the company. And that can sound controversial sometimes, but I think the person is more important than the company. So if you can hold that belief and say, what do I do for this person that's important to them, whether it's their job or their broader life, and if your network is based on those kind of relationships, then power and politics will move with that as and when you need. And in terms of power, I mean, if you can get something done because of influence and because of just having a direct relationship with someone at a human level, that should be most of it. At times that doesn't work, and you've got to use your veto power to do it, and then sometimes that doesn't work, and you've got to become a bulldozer, and you've got to get it done. But you try to avoid the last two as much as possible. But I think for me, it all starts with network and just a very deep connection with the people I work with.
Derek?
Ironically, I find this question kind of a reflective one, because I think if you'd asked me that question 15 years ago, my answer would look entirely different, right?
But I think my answer would have been very different.
Right? That's what I'm saying. The answer would be very, very different. Because
you did not want to work with the three of us 20 years ago, is what he's saying.
And that is a fact.
Yeah. I think the motivations are different, right? I think with age and experience comes a very different perspective on that. And so for me, I would put it into self-awareness, empathy, empowerment, and credibility in terms of how you approach things. The self-awareness one is just, first of all, I recognized long before my professional career and far more my genetic makeup as a Lebanese, sit around the table at a Sunday. I love relationships. I'm inherently going to build relationships as an individual. I think the empathy part becomes really important, because what is the role of the relationship for you? I think it's important to understand what the value of that relationship is with the other folks around you. Which then leads you into an area of that self-awareness of ego. Because sometimes you're developing the relationship for the value of that individual, that whoever that group is or that individual is, more so for the value of them than it is for you. But I think that sort of understanding of that exchange is really, really important. And then are you prepared to actually reflect that in terms of how you show up authentically? And I think some of the elements you were talking about, Nikki. But I think those are sort of the guidelines that I look to follow. And then if you start from the standpoint of we're all trying to get to the same goal, to your point, sometimes that means you have to flex a little bit in terms of the betterment of and what Vic's talking about, the betterment of how the outcome of the company will be or the individual. But I think I find myself actually thinking like, wow, that would have been a very different question when I was at a different level in my career.
Yeah, it's very interesting when this topic comes up, and it comes rather frequently. One of the observations that a lot of marketing people at the middle level, which are the ones that are actually moving the agenda forward, would say in terms of the ability to move things around, as good as we are marketing to multiple segments when it comes to our customers and consumers, when it comes to our internal stakeholders, the different people that need to actually help you move something around, we're not as good. We come with our standard template and we've achieved absolute truth, and here I am selling to you, when in reality, the whole notion of internal customers are customers too, and making the presentations of those concepts so that it benefits their agenda becomes a rather interesting approach. And I know for a fact that many of you do that. I've seen you do it, Tarek.
I think the other part of it is I think you're also
the franchise business also makes you do it.
100%. I think you're also starting to see us approach things from a structural perspective differently too. I mean, we just went through a reorganization at McDonald's that was truly about moving vertical and a lot of companies are functioning as silos and functionals to a much more horizontal. And when we did it, we actually restructured things cross-functionally. And that actually removed some of the needs for understanding of these elements of politicking and moving through. On a couple of those, we said, you know what? No, we're just going to structure them that way. So now they're a team. You remove that move across the hallway. So I think you're starting to see some of those things happen as well as we break down traditional structures.
And just to build a little bit on the structure piece, well, I'm going to, not exactly that, but I do think sort of now as we are a more diverse and inclusive society, and there are more of us, or more types of people who are driving decisions and needing to lean in this way, we have to think about how you build these relationships and how you gain and then leverage that power a little differently. I can say as a woman and as a Black woman, I've always had to figure out, how do I navigate this? How do I figure this out? Because what we were talking about wealth earlier, I'm not going to be invited to the lunch on the golf course. I'm not, those structures that have historically been in place as to how you start to build and wield power and navigate politics. In some places, those are still in place. And so those of us who have not historically been in those rooms, have to figure out how do we make our way through that. But then we are in a time when some of those structures are being dismantled or restructured. And so I think for those of us who've always had to figure out how to lead with empathy and always had to figure out how to navigate and manage relationships, it is the time for us to sort of leverage that superpower, because it's something that we've had to do since birth. I've had to do since birth. I won't speak for anyone else. And so now I can draw on that.
That's great. That's great. It's interesting, Ravi, the way that the hope on the way that the role is evolving. We have not mentioned advertising once, and we're 40 minutes into the conversations, which is a good sign of where things are going. But we've talked a lot about data. We've talked a lot about transformation. We've talked a lot about the multiple roles that you guys are playing on a day-to-day basis. When it comes to the thou shall not delegate, which are those for you? Why don't we start with you, Vic?
That would have been a different answer for you a few years ago too, huh?
No. I delegate a lot now.
You okay with that?
Yeah, no, I'm getting there. I think that it's interesting. I had to do a few things to be able to get myself to do that. Most of our meetings, we start with one slide that says how the team that's presenting to you has to. The slide only says how can here's the support we need. So we become how can I help meetings, and 2-hour meetings and then half an hour, 45 minutes. So how can I help? I don't need to see your presentation. I read it. I've seen it. How can I help? And I'm trying to shift the conversation to that. So you start to shift your role towards you're doing it. What's blocking you? Money, resources, people, silos, politics, power. How can we help? So, gosh, most of us become that. What do I not delegate? I would say a fair amount of conversations that involve the corporate hat, where you can't delegate some of that stuff, whether it's a financial conversation, whether it's something to do with earnings, something to do with supply chain, something to do with countries we're in conflict with, that you can't delegate. And then at times, I have become better at this. Big campaign work, I have to see it and touch it before it goes out. But just big stuff. And that I still can't delegate, but yeah.
Derek?
Well, the first one is people. You absolutely cannot delegate your vision for development, for management of your people. And by the way, that's both for the good stuff, right? Those who we want to advance, but even more so for the tough ones, right? When it's time either have a hard conversation or it's time to create that separation. You can't delegate the core purpose and commitment of the leadership team that you're part of at the executive level. Mm-hmm. There are places inside there where you can involve your folks, but you make a commitment as a leadership team, and part of what makes C-suite teams work really well is that shared vision commitment to show up. And so you can't delegate that. That also causes a major credibility issue, going back to the marketing element of this thing. And then like Vic, for me, it's less about the campaign. It's more about big bets to really impact the business. If we know that it's the case, then I've got to make sure that I'm M. And then the last one I would say is I don't delegate the big cultural issues of what I'm trying to do with my organization. And a quick example I'll give you is I joined an organization that really struggled with failure. There was a significant fear of failure in our organization. And I recognized very early on, and I have a personal belief, you can't get to greatness by being afraid to fail. And so I chose to own that very directly, that I was going to create a space in the organization. And now we actually codify it. We quarterly do what we call the Amazing Almost Awards, where we actually celebrate it, we reward it, and we're rewarding your ability to fail greatly. And we deliberately put those two words together because there is a great way to fail. There's a responsible way to fail. So, but you can't make those kind of changes, state it, and walk away. You have to own those. So I think big cultural elements, that's one simple example. I'd say those are the ones I don't delegate.
And Nikki, and you?
So first, I sort of see my role as a leader I have 3 jobs, and I did not make this up. I stole it from Ken Chenault. But it's to define reality, remove barriers, and set the vision for the future. Like, that's the role of a leader. Those things, that's my job. Other things, just broadly speaking, can be delegated to prepared people, right? Those who are ready to step in and serve. And I try to I am a person who needs autonomy. I never want my boss to tell me anything. It's very annoying for people that I've worked for. And so I recognize that most of the people with whom I work have a similar view. They're not necessarily ready for that type of autonomy, right? And so it's understanding from a situational perspective, when there is something to delegate, is the person ready? And that's part of my decision making. That said, one of the other things that I do not delegate are things that I believe are going to garner a negative reaction when it is my decision and there is no developmental value for someone else doing that. So if I know that there's going to be blowback from a decision that I've made, perhaps in an area that someone else, someone on my team is responsible for, I'm not going to sort of put them out there to deliver that message. I'm going to deliver that message and take that negative feedback unless there is value in them learning how to navigate that situation. And that's another piece that and this is sometimes not great. I'm working on the development part, that exception, but I'm always going to take the hit if I can take the hit for my team, because I want them to sort of, that failure part, I want them to feel like they can run and they're going to have that air cover. And so they're going to have a place, maybe not soft, but also not spiky, place to land when they are, if I'm supporting those decisions, I'm willing to also stand up for them.
It's great. Great.
By the way, when you talk about autonomy, Tariq and I have no idea what you're talking about.
I know.
I do, and I've worked with them.
He was the client, and we still didn't want to hear what he had to say.
A lot of the conversations that I have with folks like yourself, there are 2 big topics that they're dealing with. Number one, reigniting growth at a time of macroeconomic challenges. And the second one, which is all about action. And then the other one is, oh my God, I'm reading and I'm experimenting and playing with new technologies like GPT-4. How is that going to affect my business? How do you strike the right balance in terms of driving growth today and then sorting out those big questions for tomorrow? You want to take it first, Vic?
Sure. ChatGPT. You won't have jobs by the time you graduate. I'm just kidding. It's a good question. By the way, ChatGPT is one language-based AI model, right? But just beyond
generative AI.
Generative AI.
Let's call it for that.
And before that, AI and machine learning as well. Look, I think it's here to stay. It's here to stay, and the way we are doing it is I'll talk about a marketing level because it's corporate level strategy as well. Look, we're looking at it in two ways. Sure, we have growth and performance engines running, right? And they have been before generative AI. We're looking at it in two ways. One is how can it make what we're doing better? And the second is how can it cut costs? And you got to look at both those. We've got about 17 to 19 pilots running right now, which will be proven out. We have a day zero end of June, end of September. And so everything from eliminating photography, eliminating actual photography, to eliminating translations and using agencies who translate all our work or translation services, to so this is the cost side of it, right? To eliminating messaging, eliminating a whole bunch of stuff. I mean, you're talking millions of dollars of savings, but we're going to prove them out and drive it. From a how does it enhance your business? I mean, if it all comes back into data. I mean, from looking at data, looking at the multiple streams of data we spoke about, and how that can get you to much better insights, how that can get you to. I mean, AI, we're experimenting with it, writing code for our hp.com website, and the number of products you launch, done. And so my message right now, the team has embraced it. We've actually we've decided very wisely, I would say. The leaders have decided we don't have all the answers, and we've literally gotten everyone to be part of it, but we've set up some guardrails. But the ideas coming from folks deep down in the organization are fantastic, and we're just sort of running them in a pipeline, stage gate, funnel, and making it happen. So we're embracing it.
Tarek?
Let me back up to the impetus to that question you asked, because I actually think it's the most fundamental challenge that leadership teams, not CMOs, leadership teams
That's
face.
right.
Which is grow the business now
Tomorrow.
with an eye to the future. In fact, I just left, I came up here after a 4-day U.S. leadership meeting where that was the center of the plate for us. I think that it ranges from another question around what are the places you're willing to abdicate responsibility and allow your leaders to lead, and where are the places you're absolutely not. You have to continue to drive the business itself. But the problem is, and frankly, even when the business is doing well, it's hard to potentially say what's out here. And the flip side is, sometimes when we look way out here at 10 years, we do it in a way where there's no actionability to it. What do you do with it, right? And so looking to the future and having that kind of foresight view is fantastic. What's that ability to bring those things back and forth and actually have them impact the business today as a result of what you're learning about tomorrow? I actually think that is one of the fundamental biggest challenges a great leadership team faces. Because those who ride that ramp of just being amazing, and we're in one of those positions right now. We are leading historic results on our business, and yet we are going through the most significant transformation we've ever gone through as a business. And just 2 years ago, McDonald's had 2 channels, a drive-through and a counter, right? Now we're on an app. We're on third-party delivery. We're on integrated delivery. We're on curbside. And now we're launching Ready on Arrival, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? It'd be really easy to kind of say, we got it. We're putting up just historic numbers for the business and for our franchisees. And yet we could be so irrelevant like that if we're not thinking about some of these future elements. It's not, I don't think there's a straight answer on this one. It's not easy, and I would just say you better stay self-aware. And the example I continue to use actually comes out of his category. Why is it Apple developed a phone with a camera on it and Kodak didn't? Right? Like, just fundamentally, that's almost illogical, right? When you know that your business is under pressure on your core business around a camera, and yet a computer company developed a product that fundamentally put that, and they have other parts of their business, but I mean, that sort of core growth of their business out of business.
Nikki?
This is, to your point, Tarek, obviously a challenge of how you balance the two. I would say it's even more so within our industry. First and foremost, for us in terms of priorities, are sort of the safety and soundness of the financial lives of our customers and clients. And so as we think about innovation broadly as well as generative AI specifically, it's always through a risk management lens, especially when you're under a consent order due to risk management practices. So those we on many things are comfortable. Sometimes we're not, but on some things we're comfortable being a fast follower. And this is one where we are exploring. It is not throughout the organization, it is siloed, because we need to ensure that we figure it out. But the view is not to eliminate jobs. I'm sure, we'll see what the future is with generative AI, but how do we enable those relationships that I talked about earlier? So if instead of doing some back office, low value activity that a banker has to do for a client, if that can be done by AI or other innovative tool, so that now my banker can spend more time with clients, that's the role that we see those types of innovations playing. But it is through the lens of safety and soundness first. And so we know we have to be there. We will lose if we are not. We will lose if we're not proactively figuring out how those solutions work within our business. But it is also with a little bit of a slow roll.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that.